Just to get started, do you mind introducing yourself?
I'm Catherine Hennings. I'm here to talk about the ice storm of 1998 that affected Eastern Ontario and Quebec.
Where are you from?
From Lindsay.
From Lindsay, born and raised?
No, I've been here for almost 30 years.
Almost 30 years. And you moved here what year?
1993.
Do you like it in Lindsay?
I love Lindsay. Everybody helps one another, looks out for one another. So the ice storm started on January the 4th, 1998. It lasted for about 5 days, the actual precipitation, but the effects of the freezing rain were still felt in rural areas right up to the end of January. With about 80 millimeters of ice had fallen over a 5-day period in Eastern Ontario, Quebec, and the northern US in that area. I was in Lindsay. And at that time, I had been watching all the coverage with the parliamentary proceedings on TV and everything, that there was quite a disaster going on in Eastern Ontario. And all the devastation, the people that were without power, they couldn't go anywhere, they were isolated. They were told to stay home because of all the ice accumulating on the roads. And I was actually really affected by it. And I was hoping that people were helping those people that were affected. And the government they were quick to react. They had hydro crews come in from all over Canada and the US to help with the transmission lines that were down, because there was quite a few transmission lines down and hydro poles. They just basically collapsed under the weight of the ice. So I was listening on TV and other media what was going on and how people were affected by it. And I was quite moved to think that, oh my goodness, these people really need help. Because they're out there, they're alone, they're cold, all the things that come with power outages in the middle of January. So I decided that if there was a way that I could help, that I felt that I needed to help. Yeah, so what I did is I went to City Hall to find out from the mayor if anything was being done by the town of Lindsay, and I was informed that yes, hydro crews had gone out. So I went to the Red Cross office and I was told that yes, Red Cross relief workers had been sent to the area, and basically made some calls out to the Montreal area, Ottawa area, saying, look, do you need anything? And I was told yes, they were in dire need of generators and blankets for people and flashlights and batteries and candles and all those things that can get you through those dark, cold days and nights. So I thought, okay, no problem, I'll collect up a few things, fill my car, maybe reach out to some other people, and at the end of the week I'll drive the car out and drop off some goods. And shortly after I put word in the local media and the newspaper that was my intention, if anybody wanted to donate anything, that I would see to it that it got out to the region. And before I knew it, people were donating. And the local ambulance service at the time, which is different from what it is today, it was the Rural Metro Ambulance Service. They knew that I was getting donations that were beyond the capacity of my small vehicle, so they offered at one of their ambulances that they would help me fill the ambulance and help get the goods out to the region. And subsequent to that, there was more articles in the paper locally. There was announcements on the radio with CKLY Lindsay at the time, letting people know that donations were being collected and that the ambulance was involved to get the goods out there. And with that publicity, there was a lot of donations that came in. So, outgrew the car, outgrew the ambulance, outgrew my apartment for collecting goods. So I had to find a central location in Lindsay where people could drop things off. So luckily enough, I acquired a retail space in the Kent Place Mall, and people could drop off donations there. And the United Way office, was located in the same complex. So luckily, United Way agreed to accept financial donations and send them 100% out to the region. All right, so January 9th and 10th, the local newspaper was putting out information about the depot being set up and a place where people could drop off goods. And CKLY was announcing every morning that the depot had been set up and that people could drop off donations to the Kent Place Mall. So starting on January the 10th, I received a phone call early every morning, just about, from the local radio station. And he woke me up with, where are we at with the ice storm relief effort, and where can people drop off donations and how can people help? And that was crucial to getting the word out to people. At the time, radio was everything, especially our local radio, because it reached every corner of Victoria County. So people were well aware that there was this relief effort going on, and schools were starting to collect goods, and community groups were collecting goods, and Boy Scouts and Girl Guides and churches, and it was quite overwhelming. They just kept showing up at the depot to drop off blankets and generators and candles and anything that I put word out about that I knew was needed in the affected region. People were showing up with it, so it was pretty fantastic. And if I needed any supplies like boxes or markers or any administrative things to record what people were dropping off and who they were, I just had to put word out to the radio, and within minutes it was on the air. So it was a really positive community effort. Everybody really jumped in to help.
Do you think something like that could happen today?
I think it would be difficult because we've lost the local radio, that sort of local messaging, what's happening locally, and that spur of the moment. Like I said, I would call the radio station needing something, and I would hang up, and in the background, listening to the radio at the depot, there was the radio personality asking the public for information or asking businesses to drop off boxes or things like that. So it was like an immediate response at the time. So I'm not sure that we could replicate that today. Yeah.
How did that relationship with the radio start?
I think it started, because I can hardly remember. I think it started with the fact that the information was in the newspaper, and then I don't know if the radio called me or I called the radio. I really can't remember. But Frank Proctor, the fellow who owned the radio station at the time, was phenomenal. He put together like a little jingle every morning, you know, Operation Ice Storm, live from Kent Place Mall, you know, with Catherine, and yeah, it was fabulous.
Was there any personalities from the newspaper that really stuck out and became a part of the movement as well?
Yes, I recall Catherine Whitnall. She was a reporter for the Lindsay Daily Post at the time, and she was involved. She was always asking, you know, what was going on, where are we at, how is the relief effort going, and she would come down to the depot and meet with myself and the United Way representative, Mike Puffer at the time, who was the director. So yeah, she did fabulous coverage of it, making sure that people knew what was happening, where the goods were going, what was still needed, that kind of thing.
And so how many people were with you at the retail space to help you with this?
I would say over the week or over the 5 or 6 days, there was about 30 people that had come forward. They weren't there maybe all the time, but whatever time they might have had, they would drop in and help put the goods into the boxes and keep an inventory, because I wanted to inventory everything so that I would be able to communicate with wherever I was going to be sending the goods exactly what we had and how many we had of each item. So they came and helped to inventory and box up goods and seal the boxes and take questions from people walking in, that kind of thing. We had large boxes that we filled. So each box was about 3 feet high and 3 feet square, that kind of thing. And I don't recall the total number of those boxes. And of course, some had blankets in them and some had batteries and candles and those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, the end of the 5 or 6 days of the relief effort, we filled a 48-foot tractor trailer full of these boxes.
Mm-hmm. And so now there's a tractor trailer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the tractor trailer comes in because not only did I outlive my car and the ambulance, but now I had a warehouse full of goods that I had collected from the community and no way to get them out to the region. And it was kind of a moving target because as the relief effort went on, I was not only on the phone with the local media getting the word out, but I was on the phone with people in the region. So government officials and things that were out in Eastern Ontario and in Quebec asking, okay, I understand that you need these blankets and batteries and blah, 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 blah. Where should I be taking them? Because we've had this effort going on and, you know, I started from day 2 and then day 3 and so on. Where would you like me to take them? And that was a moving target throughout the whole process because one day I'm planning on taking it to Kingston. But when I phoned Kingston the next day, they're all good. They've got their supplies. Now we'll refer you to such and such a place. So as it turned out, we ended up taking our 48-foot tractor trailer to the Perth area, which is Lanark County. And they had just established, by the time we went out, they had just established a brand new depot where people could come and pick up the goods that they needed. It was kind of in a rural area outside of Perth, so they were supplying about 6 shelters in the area with goods that we would be bringing to that depot.
And so all these shelters were organized through the Red Cross?
I believe so.
Okay,
Yes.
and so it was through the Red Cross you were getting coordinates and directions of where to go?
I was talking to government officials and I talked directly to Rick Hillier, which, who was with the armed forces. He was kind of leading the entire operation recuperation.
Okay.
That it was named because they brought in armed forces to help because this was a huge devastation, right? It was like the largest weather-related devastating effect that Canada had ever experienced up to that time. So military was brought in and I made contact with Rick Hillier and said, I know the military is there, they're bringing goods, we have goods, where can I send them? And that's how we ended up just outside of Perth. When I went out, the freezing rain precipitation itself had ceased a few days before we went out, but the effects were still there. The trees were still coated with ice, they were all bent over. You could see those hydro poles that I had heard so much about just toppled over with all their wires strung out and laying all over the place. You could see those transmission towers, the steel towers toppled and broken. So a really, really eerie drive out there. Definitely a devastated area for sure from what I saw. And speaking to other people when I was there, like there was some hydro workers that I spoke to, they said it was just awful. In some places, trees, there was nothing left of trees except for like tree trunks. It's as if the trees had just been severed off and there was just these barren areas of tree trunks. It was just quite
Any idea how that would
devastating.
happen?
The weight of the ice.
Just snapped off the tree?
Yep, just snapped trees.
That is insane.
Yeah.
Wow.
I remember when I got there, there was some municipal officials from Lanark County. They had been there, or, you know, seconded, I guess, to man this depot because obviously their duties as municipal workers had been somewhat dissolved during this whole storm because nobody was going to work. Nothing was working. There was no power. So I believe these municipal employees were seconded to basically man the depot and deal with the military, because the military was there when I showed up, bringing in bottles and bottles of water, so that outlying areas and people could come in and pick it up from there. So there was about 4 people that I recall being at the depot. Yeah, and we basically filled it. So our truck basically filled the depot. When we got there, there wasn't much. And by the time we left at the end of the day, all of our boxes were there and opened up and ready for supplying the shelters and hospitals around the area that needed goods. One of the things I had done in Lindsay before we even left is I had told the radio station that I would make contact when I got to the depot to let our local community know we got there. The goods have been received, we made it, kind of thing. Not knowing, because I wasn't in the midst of it, not knowing that the logistics of making contact with a radio station from a place that has no power would be a challenge, if not impossible. So interestingly enough, when I was at the depot, one of the things I asked was, how do I make this call? And cell phones weren't as big as they are today. And I'm not even sure if we would have been able to communicate by cell phone because all the towers were down. So luckily at the depot, because the military was there, they had a military phone. So that was quite the experience. Picking up this, what seemed like this huge phone out of a box kind of metal container, phoning the local radio station to basically report in and to thank the members of our community once again for all their donations and that we had made it there. So that was an interesting experience. I had never communicated with one of those devices before. So because many of the communities had declared a state of emergency quite quickly into the storm, because millions of people were affected, they felt that the Canadian Armed Forces needed to be called in to help. So on January the 8th, the military was brought in to help clear debris from roads and to help go door to door, make sure that people were safe in the affected regions. And over 15,000 military personnel were deployed. And as I mentioned, they called it Operation Recuperation, was kind of the name for this military act. And Canadian Forces members from about 200 units across Canada helped the provincial and the municipal workers to clear roads, rescue people that were trapped, evacuate the sick people, take people to shelters, and feed, about 100,000 people that were frozen out of their homes at the time. 2,000 soldiers from Petawawa and Borden helped in the Ottawa area. And it was the largest deployment of Canadian military personnel since the Korean War.
What was it like interacting with members of the military? Because you mentioned you spoke to
Rick Hillier.
Rick Hillier.
Yeah. It was the first time, I'd have to say it was the first time I've ever interacted with anybody, of that caliber in the military. But it's not unlike any other conversation. And, I got the sense that everything was under control as far as the military was concerned. They were very organized. They were able to relay to me, again, like where the need was on such and such a date versus the next day where they needed supplies to go and who they were helping. A little overwhelming when I got to the depot outside of Perth, because military vehicles are really big, So even though we came in with a transport truck, the military vehicles bringing in water and such were huge. But yeah, just very orderly people. They had a mission to accomplish and a goal to reach, and that was their primary objective.
Mm-hmm. Did you speak to anyone directly who had lost power, who was kind of dealing with the worst effects of the storm?
I didn't really, when I was out there, I didn't really speak to anybody that was directly affected, but what hit me was when I was at the depot and helping to organize the boxes and get things going. I remember a fellow coming in, and he was just elated that we had flashlights and batteries because he was from a hospital. And it just, you know, again, as much as you hear on the TV and you read in the papers at the time, to be standing beside someone who's picking up flashlights and batteries for a hospital. I mean, we think of hospitals as a place to go where it's safe, it's well lit, things are working. Evidently not so. And, you know, so it was just that little interaction that, again, I stepped back and thought, wow, you know, this is big, this is bad. But of course, things like surgeries were canceled. So operations in one area that were ceasing to happen, like your normal medical care, was being pivoted to care for people that had no homes. Mm-hmm. And they were being shipped in. So yeah, very adaptable, resilient people. It was like unbelievable.
So regular medical care was canceled. Were they able to get to people who had to call? Could they even call 911 if they needed anything?
I think they could, well, again, depending on where you were. Yeah. If there was no power, it's unlikely you'd be able to call anybody. But not only that, with the devastation that was happening and the ice storm and the cold temperatures, the trees down and power lines down, emergency vehicles couldn't get into a lot of homes. So people were isolated. And I can imagine it would have been very, very scary. And I know some people, unfortunately, took measures into their own hands and brought generators indoors, or tried to light fires indoors to keep warm, because this is January. It was really, really cold after that ice storm and no way to heat their homes. So carbon monoxide poisoning was a real concern. There was some deaths due to carbon monoxide poisoning and some injuries or long-term effects from others who had been exposed to it in their homes. But people were doing the best they could, you know, in the circumstances. Some people were injured by from clearing ice. So ice that had built up on their roofs or, out on their sidewalks. These people are trying to get out. And so there was cases of heart attacks. There was cases of trees falling on homes or falling directly on people, injuring them. And that's why, the message was out there. Municipalities were trying to get the word out to people through media, radio, if you had a battery operated transistor radio or something. They were urging people to stay home and stay in, because you never knew when that tree was going to break, when that line was going to come down right over your head. And sidewalks were slippery, and falls were a concern, and broken bones and injuries. So yes, this devastation caused a loss of $5.5 billion in that region, right? Mm-hmm. Now a lot of that was due to losses of food. So people couldn't keep their food cold anymore in their freezers and fridges and such, right? So all their food was lost at the end of the day. And there was those other insurance claims for houses being damaged and those kinds of things. For me personally, the takeaway is when you have an idea to do something and you think it's the right thing to do, that you should take a shot at it and try it. Because there are people just willing to jump in and help. But not everybody's willing to start that kind of an effort. Sometimes people just sit back and wait, right? Let's see what's happening. Sort of what I did in the beginning, right? Going to City Hall, seeing if I could jump on the backs of something else that was going on. So I found that that happens a lot. So if you're the person that wants to start something and get the other people to jump in, then just do it. Because there's lots of help out there. You know, especially our community. We have a hugely caring community. Mm-hmm. That whole effort that happened in 1998 is a direct reflection of the population in Lindsay, right? That's exactly who we are. We care for our neighbors, we look out for the elderly, we jump in and help the sick. That's just who we are.
How do you think a moment like this represents Canada?
Well, I think back in 1998, at that time, I think John Chrétien, who was the Prime Minister, I think he said it really well when he, in February, just after the storm, said in Parliament that, you know, nature reminds us who is really the boss on our planet. And to be Canadian is to be a member of a living and active community. And he says that wherever we live in this great country, be we rich or poor, and whatever our political bent, we're all citizens. And as such, when things go wrong, we help each other. We work together and we band together. And the ice storm of 1998 triggered this natural reflex in us. Canadians displayed a profound desire to help the victims of that storm. When this winter disaster struck, families, neighbors, and for that matter, all Canadians came to the rescue. Everybody wanted to help. So I thought he summed up, you know, the true nature of what it is to be Canadian. We've always been proud of the fact that Canadians care, and I think he summed that up really well for us. And then again, during the 20th anniversary of the ice storm, Prime Minister Trudeau issued a statement, which it read in part, that 20 years later, time has not dimmed the outpouring of compassion and the sense of community that Canadians show to each other. And he says that today, which would have been the 20th anniversary, he says he hopes that all Canadians reflect on or learn more about the Great Ice Storm and how we were there for each other.